Peter Green, born Peter Allen Greenbaum on October 29, 1946, in Bethnal Green, London, was not just a guitarist, singer, and songwriter. He was a force of emotion, a deeply expressive artist whose music cut straight to the soul, and whose life journey, while rich in musical brilliance, was steeped in personal tragedy, psychological torment, and eventual isolation, making him one of the most hauntingly poignant figures in rock and blues history. A man whose influence shaped generations of musicians, yet whose name remains, even now, shrouded in a kind of reverent sadness, as though the full weight of his genius could only ever be appreciated through the lens of everything he endured and ultimately lost. He was a prodigious talent from an early age, teaching himself guitar and immersing himself in the works of American blues legends like B.B. King, Muddy Waters, and Elmore James. And by his late teens, he was already showing signs of the raw, emotional playing style that would set him apart from his peers, not in technical flash or bravado, but in tone, restraint, and an uncanny ability to make a single note speak volumes. His phrasing, often gentle and deliberate, seemed to breathe, to convey a vulnerability that mirrored his own inward-looking nature. And it wasn't long before his talents caught the attention of established musicians in London's booming blues scene, leading to a short stint with Peter Bardons and Peter B.S. Lunis, and, more significantly, a role replacing Eric Clapton and John Mayall in the Blues Breakers in 1966, a move that was at once audacious and prophetic, as Clapton was already being hailed as a god of the guitar. Yet Green stepped into the role with a quiet confidence and delivered performances that astonished audiences and critics alike, particularly on the album A Hard Road, where his playing on tracks like The Supernatural showcased a chilling beauty and emotional depth that few could match. And it was during this time that Green began forming the idea of a new band, one that would take the blues foundation he loved and expand it into new emotional and sonic territories. And so in 1967, he left Mayall's band and formed Fleetwood Mac, naming the group after drummer Mick Fleetwood and bassist John McVie as a gesture of friendship and inclusion, despite McVie initially being hesitant to join. But Green's loyalty and vision would eventually pull the group together, and thus Fleetwood Mac was born. First as a straight blues band, but quickly evolving under Green's direction into something far more nuanced and emotionally resonant. With early tracks like Black Magic Woman, Love That Burns, and Need Your Love So Bad exemplifying his unique blend of blues authenticity and poetic melancholy. And then came Albatross, an instrumental masterpiece that soared to #1 in the UK, ethereal and haunting. It broke from blues traditions and introduced a more ambient, contemplative sound that revealed the full spectrum of Green's artistry and hinted at the internal complexities of the man himself, who, even at the height of success, was already becoming increasingly disillusioned with fame, wealth, and the perceived moral compromises of the music industry. Feelings that were exacerbated by his experimentation with LSD and other hallucinogens, which in the late 1960s were often romanticized as tools for spiritual awakening, but which, for Green, became pathways into paranoia, existential despair, and ultimately, a devastating mental unraveling that would define the rest of his life. By 1970, Green was mentally deteriorating rapidly, plagued by delusions and an obsessive desire to give away all of his money, believing it to be the root of evil. And after a traumatic trip to Munich, where he is said to have taken large amounts of LSD while visiting a commune known for extreme psychedelic practices, he returned to England a deeply changed man, increasingly erratic, unkempt, and reclusive, no longer interested in continuing with Fleetwood Mac, which by then was rising rapidly in fame and commercial potential. And so in a shocking and deeply sorrowful move, he quit the band he had founded, turning away from music, fame, and the future that could have made him a global icon on par with the likes of Clapton or Page, and thus began his long and painful descent into obscurity, a period marked by severe mental health struggles, including schizophrenia, which led to multiple hospitalizations, electroconvulsive therapy, and years of isolation from the public and the music world, during which time he was often impoverished, at times homeless, and completely disconnected from the legacy he had helped create. while Fleetwood Mac went on to become one of the most commercially successful bands in history, especially after the addition of Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks in the mid-1970s, a transformation that bore little resemblance to the original blues-driven vision Green had pioneered. And though he was occasionally referenced or wanted by his former bandmates, Green remained an outsider, a ghostly figure whose genius had been lost to a tragic collision of sensitivity, substance abuse, and a world that had no place for a man so emotionally fragile and spiritually haunted. And yet his music never stopped resonating, never lost its power, with guitarists around the world. From Carlos Santana, who turned Black Magic Woman into an anthem, to David Gilmour, Kirk Hammett, and even Jimmy Page, citing Green as one of the greatest and most underappreciated players of all time, marveling at his ability to express longing, sorrow, and love in every bend, slide, and vibrato. And though he would sporadically attempt to return to music, releasing a handful of solo records in the late 1970s and forming the Peter Green Splinter Group in the late 1990s, these efforts were uneven and often tinged with the sadness of a man trying to reclaim something that had long since slipped away, his playing more hesitant, his presence subdued. Yet still, in moments, there was magic, the unmistakable Green tone, that mournful cry of a man who had seen too much, felt too deeply, and paid the price. And in these performances, fans could glimpse the brilliance that once burned so brightly and the fragility that had always been just beneath the surface. And as the years went on, Green continued to live quietly, mostly out of the spotlight, occasionally emerging for interviews or tributes, but always with a sense of distance, as though he was watching his legacy from the other side of a glass wall, no longer fully part of the world that had once celebrated him. Until finally, on July 25th, 2020, he passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, prompting an outpouring of grief and tributes from fans, musicians, and critics alike, who remembered him not only as a founding member of Fleetwood Mac or as the composer of timeless classics, but as a deeply human figure, an artist whose story reminded the world of how thin the line can be between genius and madness, between creation and destruction, and whose life served as both an inspiration and a warning, a tale of what can happen when a sensitive soul is thrust into the unforgiving machinery of fame and fortune without the protection or understanding it so desperately needs. And today, as listeners rediscover his music, whether the aching vulnerability of Man of the World, the hypnotic elegance of Albatross, or the raw blues power of Oh Well, they find in Peter Green a kind of purity that is all too rare, a musician who never played to impress but to feel, who laid bare his soul every time he touched a guitar, and who, in doing so, gave the world a gift it did not fully appreciate until it was too late. And though he may have lost everything in material terms, his fame, his fortune, his health, his place in the band he founded, he gained something far more enduring, a legacy that lives not in chart positions or ticket sales, but in the hearts of those who understand what it means to hurt, to love, to lose, and to express all of that through music. And so while the world may remember Peter Green as the genius who lost everything, those who truly listen know that in his loss, he gave us something immeasurable, something eternal, a sound that still lingers, like a ghost in the strings, reminding us that the deepest truths often come not from those who shout the loudest, but from those who quietly, in the end. Peter Green's legacy is not simply one of tragedy, but of haunting, transcendent beauty forged in the heart of darkness, a reminder that genius often walks hand in hand with torment. Though he may have slipped from the public eye, his presence was never truly gone, etched into the DNA of rock music, whispered through every blues-infused guitar solo that dares to touch raw emotion. As the founding architect of Fleetwood Mac, Green's contributions were seismic, defining a sound that merged deep blues with soul-stirring vulnerability, delivering tracks like Oh Well, Black Magic Woman, and Man of the World that still pulse with life. But with fame came the demons, inner torment, amplified by excessive LSD use, and the overwhelming burden of his own sensitivity. The music industry, relentless and unkind, moved forward while Green stepped back, vanishing into a haze of mental illness, isolation, and quiet obscurity. He became a myth, a cautionary tale, but also a symbol of artistic purity untainted by commercial compromise. And though he never fully returned to reclaim his throne, those who knew his music understood. His genius didn't need headlines to endure. Peter Green gave the world his soul through 6 strings, then walked away before it could consume him entirely. In a world obsessed with image and longevity, he left behind something far more powerful: authenticity, anguish, and unmatched talent suspended in time. He may have lost everything the world calls success, but in truth, he transcended it, leaving a legacy far more profound than chart positions or fame. His voice, through his guitar, remains eternal, a wounded cry, a gentle prayer, a roar from the depths of a man who felt too much. And that, perhaps, is the final word on Peter Green, the genius who gave everything, and in doing so, lost only what never truly mattered.